along to another episode of Sweet Tea and Coffee. I'm sitting in here with my co-host, Blake Russell. And Blake, I have another friend of the pod.
Okay, cool.
To bring to the table.
All right.
Well, we got to figure out what qualifies. I think there's a lot of folks wanting to know what does it take to be a friend of the pod. And we've said the bar is pretty low.
Yeah, we don't really have a lot of specifications on what that is.
That's right. So here's our friend of the pod for the day, Sydney Hampton.
Okay.
So Sydney and Hunter go to our church. Hunter's one of our new deacons. But Sydney said, and she gave me some feedback on Margie's interview.
All right.
And she talked about just a few points in Margie's interview that really challenged her as a parent. That particularly the part where Margie talked about holding David accountable to the Holy Spirit after he became a Christian. Like, this is between you and the Lord, and it's the Holy Spirit's job to work in your life. And Sydney just said that was really encouraging to her as a parent. Now, here's the deal. So we're gonna give Sydney the friend of the pod badge.
Okay.
But that's the only episode she's listened to.
What?
I know.
Okay.
So that's what I'm saying. Is that the bar? I don't know what the bar is. Sydney, if you're going to listen to this, I hope you do now that you're a friend of the pod. Yeah. Sydney, if you listen to this, maybe check a few more episodes off your list. And
because after today, we have 40. So there's
Sydney,
a lot of episodes to listen to.
Yeah, you've got around 35-ish hours.
Yeah. Maybe more.
Maybe more. No, we don't go an hour. You've got a few hours to spend with Sweet Tea and Coffee, but you're a friend of the pod. So anyway, that is a great example. I'm all kidding aside. That's a great example of the kind of stuff we want to hear. How's this encouraging you? In what ways does your story interact with the stories that you've heard on this podcast? Sydney, thanks for sharing that with us, and others let us know the same. We're going to get into the episode today, though. We've got Mark Clark here with us. Mark needs no introduction. You all know Mark Clark, and his story is first of all, Mark is a dear friend of Blake and I's, and has been just kind of one of these people that's been a constant encouragement in our life and ministry, and has been at this church since conception.
Yes.
Not of the church.
No.
but anyway, we're going to get into Mark's story, and Mark just has such a cool perspective on this church and what God's doing here, and his life. Maybe some interesting facts that you may not know about Mark Clark. Stick around for this episode. All right, so I said we've got Mark Clark in here with us. Mark, thanks for stopping by, coming and hanging out at the podcast. You said that you've listened to a few.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mark's officially a friend of the pod.
Yeah.
Welcome along. Mark is one of our elders here, and as I said in the show opener, Mark and his family go way back into the history of Fredonia Hill, and so it'll be cool to talk to Mark today just about his story and the way in ways in which God has worked in his life. But also, Mark has a cool perspective on the history of the church. So, Mark, you are a native to Nacogdoches.
I am a B-I-N.
That's right. It's an elite group of people.
That is right.
So, your mom and dad the same? Were they born and raised here? How did your family get to Nacogdoches?
I think by covered wagon.
Yeah.
Some.
We came together.
Yeah. And Daddy always said his side of the family was riding quite fast on horseback coming from the east when they hit the Sabine River.
Trying to escape somebody.
He said, don't look too far up the family tree.
Yeah.
So Mark came through a band of outlaws to Nacogdoches.
That's right. As did a lot of Texans.
That's right.
As did a lot of Texans. That's right. Well, wow. So your family then has been here quite a long time. What did your dad do? This is maybe kind of one of these interesting Mark Clark facts that a lot of people might know, but what was life like for you growing up as a kid in Nacogdoches?
Oh, my life just really centered around my parents and their business. We had a small meat packing plant out on the south side of town. That was we just grew up in it. Me and my sisters, we grew up working. We grew up hunting and fishing, as me especially with my dad, and doing those things, and still carry on those traditions with my kids even today. Both my son and my daughter both hunt and fish, and so we do those things. But life was really centered around probably two things, and that was church and work.
Yeah.
Those were the two main things that we did on a day in and day out business, or day in, day out basis, was church and work. And that was the center of our life together as a family, and the family centered around those things.
Wow. Take us through. This is interesting to me because I just recently have been reading quite a bit about Eugene Peterson, and his family was in the meat packing business, and so he grew up. I believe it was his dad. Now I'm on the spot, maybe saying some wrong things, but I think it was his dad that was a butcher, and so he grew up in that world. Yeah. And some of his stories, he talks about just how his dad was really a central person in the community because of that work, and how he became a pastor, and he really started to understand the meaning of what a congregation was by the butcher shop. Yeah. And watching the way in which his dad was a central figure in that business was really formative for him. So it was interesting. What was life? I mean, what was that like to grow up in that context? You said it was work and church, and so I imagine you spent a lot of time in your dad's world. Oh yeah. What was that like? Bring us into that.
Well, as far as work goes, the service that he rendered to especially the local farmers and ranchers was an essential service back then, because people raised their own livestock to feed their families, things like that. My dad was the first one to ever have what we used to call a locker plant. So we had a place on North Street. It's in that building where the Landmark Center is now, on North Street. And he had part of that building, and had a big, large walk-in freezer so that people could store stuff, because back then, if you had a freezer at home, generally they were real small, very small. So if you had a hog butchered, or you had a calf especially butchered, or even garden vegetables, this time of the year we're all planting gardens and doing stuff, and a harvest off of those, he had a place where you could rent what we call drawers, and they would hold about 50, 60 pounds of meat or vegetables and stuff. And then you could come ever so often, whenever you needed to, you could come up there, and you had a key. He had a master key, and you had a key to yours, where nobody else could get into your stuff, and you could go in there and get what you needed maybe for a week or two at home, and then store that at home. But you could go back and forth up there to the locker plant and get what you needed. Wow. And that was before you had a lot of, like I say, home refrigeration, and people had a lot of appliances in their home. They just had basic stuff. Right. We're talking about late 40s, early 50s when all that. So he kind of pioneered a lot of that here. And, and provided those services. And then he was in the slaughtering end of the business too. So we would take one all the way from, if you called him and you said, I got 2 or 3 calves pinned up in pen, Wilsey, would you come pick them up? And we'd head out in the country and go pick them up in a trailer, bring them back to the plant. We'd slaughter them and do the whole 9 yards, cut them up. We'd take a 1,000-pound calf or yearling and put him in 1-pound packages eventually. Wow. So you could eat him.
My goodness. So you did the whole thing start to finish.
Oh yeah. We did it all.
Well, and you're along for the whole ride? I mean, that's...
Oh yeah. 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 Time I'm 4 or 5 years old, I'm hanging out with Daddy all the time. I'm in the pickup with him, going wherever he was going, doing whatever he was doing. Go to the sale barn. Back then, we had one auction barn here, and that was on Fridays down on South Street. And that was a big event because men from all over the county and different surrounding counties came in to market their cattle and their hogs, and then buyers would be there. My dad was one of the buyers. So every Friday was spent hanging out down at Patton Livestock Commission Company and sit there and watch cattle sell, hogs sell all day long, Daddy buying what he needed. But you're talking about the congregational aspect of all that. See, Dad built friendships with these people. I mean, they trusted him because they were entrusting him with something that they had raised. It was their animal. So they trusted that once they dropped it off to his pens or we picked them up and they went into our pens, that those animals we had a tagging system and everything with numbers, and also we could keep up with them. But they trusted him all through the process that he was going to be able to deliver the final product. We didn't control it on the front end. We didn't control what they brought in. We could only work with what they brought. But if they brought us a quality animal in, they were going to get a quality meat product back, and it would always be theirs. That was something that was always real. They wanted to make sure they got their calf back, their hog back. So I watched that, and that really formed a lot of my business life even today, is that people are entrusting you with something. You build the bond of trust. And, of course, at the basis of everything that Dad and Mom did, my mom was always integral to the business. She was the bookkeeper. She was the secretary. She did everything. She did everything from keeping the home and the kids and all of us, taking care of all of us, to working with Daddy in the business and taking care of all those things. My mother was an excellent bookkeeper, high attention to detail, you know. Daddy, that was not Daddy's suit. Daddy was more like, we're going to get up and we're going to go today, and here's what all we got to do, and let's get it, you know, and we just went from can to can't. But Mother was always very integral, but both of them taught me and taught my sisters, you take care of the customer, because they practiced Christian business principles. It was nothing that they had to really think about. It was very natural to them, that the scriptural perspective of how a man is to be honorable in the community. Your name, my dad always was very, he taught us the importance of your name. Your name meant something in the community. And I still run into people. I have a lot of, I'm as successful as I am in my business, in the insurance business today, because people knew my dad.
Wow.
And they trusted my dad, and they knew my mother, and they trusted my mother, and they knew the kind of people that they were. And so I think that has made me into much of the man that I am today, is because they taught me those guiding principles, that at the basis of everything, you're representing the Lord in the world. They know that you're a Christian. You don't do anything to impugn that reputation. You be careful about everything that you do, and make sure that your dealings, especially in business, that you're always above board and you're always honest with people, and bend over backwards to help somebody. My daddy would help anybody. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen him provide for people that didn't have food. He didn't believe in wasting anything, neither did my mother. Dad was born in 1918. Mother was born in 1923. They were children of the Depression.
In the middle.
That was the life that they knew. So you didn't waste anything. I often tell people I thought that a glass. Here's the way it was at my house. If you went to the cupboard to get a glass to get you a drink of milk or water or whatever, there was 2 sets of glasses in the cupboard. There was one set that was used only for when company came or Sunday dinner. That was the good stuff, okay? Otherwise, you drank out of the Bama jelly jar that Mother had washed out, cleaned, and that was your everyday dish. Because if you dropped that and broke that, then we were good because we was going to buy some more Bama jelly.
Yeah.
So jars were, we're going to have a glass, So, I mean, that's just the way that they were. Very frugal people. You don't waste anything. And if you can help people, you help them. If they're really in need, you make sure you meet their need as best you can. Try to help them.
Well, I love hearing just that even at the very beginning of your life, you were seeing their faith play its way out.
Oh yeah,
into the way that they were living.
Yeah,
there wasn't a division. What you were observing was not a division between who mom and dad were at church and who they were in the community. You saw those worlds very, very connected, and that had a tremendous impact on you.
Oh yeah.
Where did that start for them? Were they new in the faith? Were they raised that way? How did they get to the point where those worlds, their following of Jesus, was woven completely into their life?
My mother was really raised in church. My grandfather, his name was Will Fazell, and he was a music director on the side. I mean, he sold clothes for Bell's department store and for Mize department store for many, many years. Had a furniture store at one time. But also he would lead the singing. Yeah. On Sundays like we used to do. Lead the singing. So that was at First Baptist Church, okay? So whenever Fredonia Hill was beginning to start under a brush arbor out here, on Sunday afternoons, he would come out here and lead the singing for the service that they would host out here on the hill on Sunday afternoons and in the early part of the church. He was always a member of the First Baptist Church, but he helped to start the ministry here at Fredonia Hill. My mother was just part of that. My mother learned to play the piano. She played the piano in church, was always in the choir and things like that, and taught Sunday school. I think that's where I get my love for teaching Sunday school was from my mother. She probably taught Sunday school for, 50 years. Wow. Not just children, but especially adult women's Sunday school. She learned to play the piano, she told me, on a little miniature piano that they used to have, a little keyboard. It probably just started with middle C and went up maybe one or down.
Yeah, a couple octaves, not
just
very
a couple
far.
octaves, not very. And her daddy taught her how to read music. He knew how to read music, so he would draw the letter of the music, if it was A, B, or C or whatever, on the key. Told her how to make that chord and everything, and that's how she learned to play piano at like 5, 6, 7 years old. And of course she learned playing church hymns. That's what they learned on. Yeah. And Granddaddy used to go around the countryside too and do music schools. I forget what they called that. It may come to me later. But anyway, they taught people how to harmonize. Yeah. They taught harmony. They taught some reading and mostly shape note music, and taught people how to sing and how to sing in church.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was thinking about this actually this morning on the way, just as I was thinking about songwriting for the church, and I was thinking about that time period. When my grandmother passed away, we found she was a musician, and we found a bunch of old hymnals and things like that in there. And in some of those hymnals, I think it's like a great uncle or some relative that he'd written songs for hymnals, but it wasn't like it was this, his main profession. He still had a normal day job. He was just an everyday guy that was a part of the church and said, I could do this. And I loved how the creative process for the church in that time period was the actual church. It was just folks that were in it together. Yeah. And it wasn't somebody, in Nashville or Los Angeles sending them things that they need to be singing or, whatever. Yeah. It was just whoever would step up. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that you've got that same in your line. Yeah,
and they said on Sunday afternoons, that's what they did. Yeah. They would go out in the countryside. They might go out to Cushing. Yeah. Or they might go to Garrison or someplace, and they teach these, what they called a singing school, to teach people how to sing in church and how to harmonize in 3-part and 4-part harmony.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the beginning right there. Yeah. So right there in your family was a part of this is the beginning of Fredonia Hill, and you mentioned the Brush Arbor beginning. Take us into that. I mean, so Fredonia Hill is a plant from First Baptist,
right?
And began as a Brush Arbor, and we can go from there. But talk about, based on your understanding, what was the reason? I understand that it was a group of women that really felt the need for there to be a church here on this part of town. Talk about the shape of Nacogdoches at that time, and why First Baptist felt like there needed to be a church out here.
Yeah, they were really establishing 3 or 4 churches, all pretty close together. There would have been Fredonia Hill, what would later be Calvary Baptist Church, which would be on the east side of town. Then there was another Baptist church called West Side Baptist Church on the west side of town, of course. You had First Baptist that was central. It was downtown, and then you already had the Old North Church, which was a Baptist church out on the north end of things. So what we don't understand today is that if you lived 4 or 5 miles from downtown, you lived quite some distance. Usually you had to walk it, or maybe you had one car in a household.
Right.
And they could get to town, in that one car. So they were trying to establish kind of on the outskirts of town, because town really, the south end of town really stopped up here at Fredonia Street, where it crosses South Street up here. So this was on the edge. We're on the south end of that. There was nothing out here. My dad said that when he built the plant out there where he did, which is now off of the Southeast Loop. Of course, the Loop wasn't there then either. But everything from where the church is all the way out to where the Loop is now was nothing but pastures.
Wow.
A couple of dairies and stuff like that. It was just cattle, out here. So there had begun to be a little bit of building around here, like back on Hackberry Street, and some of these older neighborhoods that are around us now.
Yeah.
And so some of that was beginning to be built up, and they felt like they needed to get a church that was central to those communities. This was called Fredonia Hill Community here. So this was kind of like a little community, like we'd have Central Heights today or something like that.
I think that's important for people to recognize, because one of the things you hear a lot when people visit here, and I think you're going to see this in a lot of different rural communities, is they go, wow, there's a lot of churches.
Yeah.
They're overwhelmed by the amount of churches, and they think, well, that seems silly. And it does. I mean, if that were what we were doing right now, then that would be silly because of the way that transportation works. But I think that's really important perspective, that in a community that is this old, a rural community that is this old, some of what you see is the product of a totally different era. Yeah. Where, like Mark's saying, 4 or 5 miles would have been a tremendous commute to make on a weekly basis. These were, even though it's just a few miles, these were separate communities, and for the most part, people stayed within those communities. So a lot of what you see was really a missional effort to reach sections of the community that maybe didn't have any sort of church presence.
Yeah, they really wanted some churches that were within walking distance of people.
Yeah.
That was a big deal. You needed to be within 1 or 2 miles of where they were living so that they could easily walk to church on a Sunday morning.
Right.
Yeah, that's just, I think that's important. You do hear that all the time. There's so many churches. Like, okay, you got to think about oldest town in Texas, like where this all began.
Yeah.
Mark, take us into the kind of evolution of your faith journey. It was obviously something that, in terms of you being exposed to the gospel and seeing Christian discipleship really play out right in front of you, is something that you were inundated with. You laugh. I've heard you tell a story before that you were attending Fredonia Hill in the womb. I mean, you've been here the entire time.
Yeah.
So it's always been something that was front and center for you in your home. And, but how does that then become your own? I mean, at what point do you begin to own your faith, and what are the circumstances that led to that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like you're saying, I was exposed to the gospel at the earliest of age. So it was not a matter of exposure, because I got exposed every Sunday morning and every Sunday night and every Wednesday night. And I went to brotherhood meetings, and I attended WMU meetings that my mother had. You know, I was in everything. So it wasn't about exposure, but it was about owning my faith. So I made profession of faith when I was 10 years old. It was on July the 4th. I was 10 years old. Dad and I were out in the garage, either getting ready to go on a fishing trip, or maybe we'd gotten back and we were cleaning up from a fishing trip or something. But a lot of my life in the summertime centers around fishing, but in the winter centers around deer hunting. So anyway, we're out there cleaning up that boat, and Daddy was just talking to me, and he told me, he said, I could tell that you were under conviction, you know, that the Lord was dealing with you. Questions that I'd had of late, you know, over the past few months probably, and things like that. And he just asked me, he just flat out asked me, he said, son, do you want to be saved? He said, do you want to trust the Lord as your Savior? And I just broke down and said, oh, yeah, that's what I need to.
Wow.
And we knelt down beside that boat, and I got saved in the garage.
Man.
That's awesome.
And I made it known to the church the following Sunday. You know, I walked the aisle, but the salvation had already taken place, and then I was baptized a few weeks later. But anyway, so that's 10 years old, and I, you know, did all the typical things that church kids do and deacons' kids do, and that is get into trouble with the other deacons' kids and the pastor's kids and everything else. Not too bad of trouble, but we, you know, being boys. So anyway, we did that kind of stuff, and I always knew that I was saved from that time forward. I didn't have any real issues with doubting my salvation. But I would say that I really didn't come into owning my faith until I was in my mid-20s, to where I knew that to follow the Lord was a real, it was very special, but it also meant that I had to follow. That it was not just a matter of getting my fire insurance policy so that it didn't go to hell, but it was also a matter that I had to come into real relationship with the Lord. And so I did. I began to follow more. And being integral to my following of him was my being cast as a role in teaching. People recognized that I had a gift for teaching, and so that became paramount in my studying, getting prepared to teach, and those things really helped to propel my faith and making my faith my own and understanding the Word and understanding the depth of it,
Mark, let me ask you a question. Was it more, when you talk about kind of that transition and of following, was it more that you recognized the need for obedience? Was it more in practical things, or was it more realizing the depth of relationship that was available to you with Jesus? So was it a relational depth, or was it a practical obedience sort of thing that really needed to take place?
I think it started as very practical obedience.
Okay.
What I should be doing, what I ought not to be doing, became to the real forefront, and I had to make decisions about my life and what I was going to do and how I was going to lead. By that time, I think, I was 23 years old when we got married, how I was going to lead in the home, what was going to be central to our home, what was going to be important in our home. And fortunately, I married a very good Christian woman that helped me to ground myself a little bit. You guys
may or may not
have had that experience, but she helped to really, help me to realize that faith is central, church is central, following the Lord is central. So we've always done that together, which I think has made it a lot easier than a lot of people have in their life. It's not their experience. And but I realized that the first steps, I think, were just about practical obedience. And then from practical obedience and learning to obey the Lord, and then really getting into His Word and learning the Word. That's what really brought the relationship aspect more to the forefront. See, I surrendered to ministry in another church when I was probably about 20 or 21 years old. And I answered the call to ministry. But I told the congregation at that time, I said, no, my call to ministry is not to pastor the church. I knew that. It's not to be a pastor or something like that. My call is within the church. My call is for teaching. My call is for administration. I knew that's what my call was on my life. But I answered that call. Of course, the first thing that everybody tries to do, or did back then, it's not so much practice now, is you got to get licensed to preach because you're going to end up being a pastor, And I was like, no, that's not my call. And but anyway, I submitted to that, and so I got the sheepskin and did all that, So I'm good to marry you and bury you.
That's right.
So we're good on that. But that was never my calling. I'm doing what I'm called to do in church right now, and I've known that, and known that for a long time. But the relationship aspect, I think, for most people, it kind of works like this. That it starts with very practical steps, and then as you mature and you get into the Word and you have a love and a greater understanding for the Word, then the relationship begins to flourish, and it just takes time for that to take place, Yeah.
Man, that's interesting, because one of the things that I think when I talk to people about, and this is a question that comes up all the time, is, what am I supposed to be doing as I open the Bible and read? What am I supposed to get out of it? And I think a lot of people, what they, on a surface level, what they're looking for is, this is a book that's going to tell me what to do. And in many ways, for sure, the Bible can do that. And we can discern from the Scriptures things that we ought to do, things that we ought not to do, and
Sure.
But if that is the depth at which we approach the scriptures, it's gonna stay pretty shallow.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that I've tried to start asking people as they read is to kind of, in the back of your mind as you read, be kind of asking yourself this question: is what I'm reading telling me about who God is? Mm-hmm. And if that kind of sits in the background, then what you're aiming at there is you're aiming at understanding and discerning the character of God.
Yeah.
Who he is. And who he is in every passage.
Right.
And from who he is, we understand who we are. But if that kind of is in the background, then what you're aiming at there is you're aiming at relationship. You're aiming at character. You're aiming at, again, discerning who he is. And that is a deeper thing than just what to do. And actually, the more, what I think I found in my life is that the more that I know who he is, the better I am able to discern what to do.
Yes, absolutely.
Has that been, I mean, I don't know, speak to that a little bit.
No, that is exactly the case. You know, my level of obedience now is not predicated on understanding just the doctrine or understanding just the theology. Now, in the beginning, when I was learning and studying, that's what I was getting.
Sure.
Because that's what I was regurgitating, more or less, is the correct doctrine, the correct theology, all this, the correctness, right? But when the relationship begins to take over and you begin to understand the depth of that and what that means in light of whatever it is that the Lord is causing you to discern at that time, what the Spirit of the Lord is talking to you about in the Word, then your level of obedience is not about the correctness, it's about the honoring of what you've learned, and you see the character transformation that is taking place in your own life as you submit to what you have learned.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is the key, is that word submission. Nobody likes it, especially as men. We fight it. We don't want it. We like to read that over the women, when we read from Corinthian letters, about wives, submit yourselves to, and all that, but he talks first to the men, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. So it's about the men and their relationship with the Lord. And then if the wife submits to you, she's going to submit to you because you become a more godly man. Mm-hmm. So it's all of that understanding, and I the Lord has really worked on me a lot, even in the past couple of years. I've had some real struggle, even in my business, with production. My business is all about production, hitting goals, hitting sales goals and numbers and all this kind of stuff. And so you can get lost in that after a while. And I've been at it almost 18 years. So you can get real lost in that stuff, and it'll begin to take a toll on you. Even spiritually, it'll take a toll on you because you're trying to have some kind of performance level in the eyes of men so that men will reward you and think well of you and all of that. And so the Lord really has taken me through a 2-year process of really stripping me down back to the basics of, even my faith in my business, because I've always conducted myself as a Christian businessman. I've never hid that. People that know me and work with me, they know that I'm a follower of Christ. They know that, my life is marked in certain ways and all of that. And I get a lot of opportunity to minister to people in my business too. But at the same time, you can get lost in all of the human struggle within the business, and you forget to have faith in the Lord that He's going to see you through in your business, that He's going to provide for you. And so one of the ways that he has done that is a couple of series ago, we were learning about the series with Elijah in Sunday school. And that part of the story where Elijah's had that great conflict with the prophets of Baal and has overcome them and everything. He calls down fire from heaven, or the Lord brings fire from heaven actually and consumes everything. And then he gets a word from Jezebel, right? So Jezebel's, I'm going to kill you. That's all it took. So he runs out into the desert and he's fleeing for his life, and he's there under the bush, and he's about to burn up from the scorching desert heat. And God, why don't you just come kill me? Why don't you just take my life? This woman's going to kill me. I just know it. And the Lord says, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he just says, just be quiet. Just be quiet. And he takes him, and where does he go? He takes him down to the brook, Kidron. He says, remain here. Just stay right here. Be quiet. And I'm going to take care of you. So what does he begin to do? He sends the ravens. Brings the food. Never too much, but always enough. Just when he needs it. From the most unclean animal that a Hebrew would ever expect to get provision from, and should by all rights, on a religious basis, should have rejected what they brought him. But that was the Lord's means of providing for him. And so the Lord taught me through that. He says, you need to get still and you need to trust me. And I'm going to bring you what you need. Now, that doesn't mean I don't work for it, because I do. And you got to get up and you got to go every day and you got to work and you got to service your clients and take care of their needs and all of that. But if we're people of faith, then that means we're people of faith on Sunday and Monday.
Yeah.
So we've got to exemplify that and understand the Lord's going to meet my needs, whatever they are. He's going to take care of me, and he's going to take care of my family, and he may do it through some very unusual means. But we got to be still, and we got to be where he puts us, wherever that is. If it doesn't make sense or not, it doesn't matter. We stay where he puts us, and then we stay there till he says, get up and go. Go somewhere else. I'm going to provide another way. So that really helped to recenter me, even in my business life, to trust him. That we're talking about our level of relationship with the Lord. So this brings me into much closer fellowship with him. Because now when I see him, when a new customer comes to me, whether they're coming to me because they've been recommended to me by somebody else or it just comes out of the blue, the first thing that I do is I thank God. You sent them. You sent them.
Yeah.
Somehow, some way, you sent them to me. That changes how I take care of them, right?
Yeah.
Because, see, that's God's gift to me. They are God's gift to me. So he's brought them to me for some reason. Sure, I can help meet their physical needs, their insurance needs, and help take care of them, but there may be opportunity for me to be able to minister to them down the road. And that happens a lot when people have calamities in their life, when we get tornadoes and big storms. When I'm delivering a death claim to somebody that's a beneficiary of a life insurance policy, I get to meet with those people. I get to talk with those people. I get to share with those people and and build some real relationship with them.
Wow.
And but that's just the Lord using the very most practical side of life to really help me to understand and fulfill some of the most spiritual side of my life. And for me to understand that the two are intertwined. They're not separated. There's not this over here or that over there. It all works together. He's put me where he has me where he wants me.
Yeah.
And I need to stay there where he wants me. And also in that, to learn to be satisfied with what he provides, the way that he decides to provide it. Because, again, my business life can be very goal-oriented, push here, push there, get this number, attain this, get that. But when I settle down and understand that the Lord's making the provision in the business and he's bringing it to me for some reason, then my whole perspective about it, about everything, changes. And now I can be happy and I can be satisfied. That doesn't mean get lazy. You don't get lazy, but you can be satisfied with the provision of the Lord. And it begins by saying thank you every time he provides, because that's the initial recognition of where it came from. Then when you realize where it came from, it's your relationship with people and the relationship in your business and how your business even works is very different. But I learned that from my mom and dad.
Yeah.
But it took me 40 years on my own in business to really make it my own.
Yeah.
See? And I think we want to, a lot of time, take from somebody else's experience and make that experience mine so that I immediately have moved to the level that they are at now.
Yeah.
But what we don't want to do is go through the wilderness for 20 or 30 years.
Right.
Yeah.
To where we really learn it on our own, and it's ours, and our faith is ours, and how I obey the Lord, that's mine, and my relationship with him is paramount above all other things.
Well, I appreciate that Sunday school lesson right there.
That
was fantastic. But you did mention provision, and I know we've gone a little bit longer, but I do want you to tell one story before we wrap up, because this is one of my favorite stories. I was in the ceiling of the zone, the room we call the zone, the other day, because that room is a black hole of Wi-Fi. We experienced that on Wednesday night a couple weeks ago, and I was trying to get some better signal in there. And as I was in there, I ran across the very, very thick wooden walls of that building. And I don't know, most people may not realize this, but that particular room was the first, aside from the brush arbor you mentioned, the first structure that this church used. And there's a really cool story about how that building came about that I've heard you tell several times. And so I'd love for you to tell that story on here.
Okay. So John and Viola Brantley were a couple in our church that my dad and actually John were business partners for several years. And he really helped to get my dad started in the meat business and so forth. And John and Viola, when I knew them even as a kid, they were probably in their early 60s, pushing 70 by then.
Yeah.
And so anyway, John and Viola started attending church out here, as I understand it, when it was still a brush arbor.
Okay.
So the church was going to build a building, needed a permanent structure. So they had, I guess John had bought a tract of timber somewhere or bought some land, and that's typically what people did back then. You bought some land, and it had trees on it. It had pine timber or oak timber on it. And then you would cut that, and then you'd have it milled into lumber, and you build you a house instead of just going to a lumber yard. So that's what John was was about doing.
Right.
Was getting all that put together because he and Viola were going to build a house. And so it had come up that the church, the congregation at that time, wanted to build a building, didn't have any money. You're talking about people, this is in the late 20s, early 30s. It's pre-World War II, getting maybe post-Depression era, or maybe even still in the Depression, I guess. And so they decided to have the lumber milled that they were going to build their house out of, and he had the logs delivered to a sawmill, and told the man that owned the mill, said, whatever the carpenters are going to build the church, whatever they need, you just mill it out of my stockpile.
Wow.
There. And so they actually gave away their home to the church. So, and they put off building their own house for many years before they were ever able to build a house for themselves.
Yeah, and that timber, that from their first house is still in there. That's just that's incredible to think about that generosity as a beginning point for even this church. I want to close this segment.
Yeah, because we're gonna have to come back. Yeah.
I want to close this segment with an image. When we take people through premarital counseling, one of the things that we go through is we talk to men about being a spiritual leader in your home. It's often a very intimidating thing to think about. And I know that idea of what does it mean to be a spiritual leader in my home, I'm just trying to figure out what following Jesus even looks like, and much less lead. And it can be a very overwhelming, very intimidating thing. And one of the things that we talk about is one of the primary ways that you lead in your home is by allowing God's principles that we glean from Scripture to lead, direct, and inform my workaday world, my practical everyday living. Yeah. And that your family sees you demonstrate biblical principles in the world in which you live. You don't have to become a great theologian.
No.
But that being a leader is about practically walking in the principles that God gives, and that's number one. And then number two is, are you having intentional conversations with your wife and with your kids about the Lord, about what He's doing, about how He's leading them? And I just want to, men, I mean, just if you're men, if you're listening, women, if you're listening, send this episode to your men. But I want to just take you back to Mark and his dad in the garage. I just want to close with that scene. And Mark grew up, as a 10-year-old kid at that point. He had watched his mom and dad live according to God's principles in the home. And that had, in so many ways that he probably couldn't even describe, that had shaped him. Mm-hmm. He had watched it play out. He'd watched his dad be a man of God in the world that his dad lived in the butcher shop.
Yeah.
And his dad, in spending time with him, just hanging out, being father-son on a fishing trip, his dad had a pointed question about what God was doing in Mark's life.
Yeah. And
his dad asked him a question on purpose, an intentional question. And that right there was the thing that sparked for you a moment of surrendering your life to the Lord. I just want to paint that as a picture of what spiritual leadership looks like in the home.
Right.
There's time, intentional time spent with his son, intentional asking of questions, and a living out of God's principles in the home. It's profound in the ways in which it's simple.
Yeah.
And I think that for men to capture that image right there as a picture of spiritual leadership, man, I hope that sticks with you.
Yeah.
We have gone a little long today.
That's
Mark,
okay.
Thank you so much. Gosh, it's been good. We will definitely be doing a part 2, because there's so much about the church. We didn't even get into that. There's so much about the church that's interesting, and we will get into that. Man, any ways that this has encouraged you or impacted you, don't forget to reach out to us. You can do that by just tapping us on the shoulder and telling us, or you can send us an email.
That email is stc@fredoniahill.org.
Yeah, I didn't set you up as good on that one. But anyway.
We just went straight into it.
We just went straight into it. Yeah. But thanks for sticking around, and we will see you on the next episode. Adios.